All right, hello, welcome. It's Big Tone's Church of Truth, episode 2. Thank you, everyone who listened to or watched the last one and had a lot of feedback and comments. This is episode 2, and we're going to be talking about groupthink. Dad, how are you? What's going on?
Yeah, very well, mate. It's kind of interesting looking at the number of people that have had a look at our first episode. It was very comforting to know that there are people out there who thought that you and I had something to say. Yeah, it was very good. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to them and to all those, the word of mouth. I only mentioned it to a few people, and just a lot of word of mouth has gone out there, which I really appreciate. And some very good comments coming back and feedback, and a lot of people are looking forward to what we've got to say, which is great.
Surprising, yes. So this is a window into conversations that we usually have over the family dinner table. So you may think that we're putting this on for a podcast, but this is essentially the stuff we normally talk about anyway.
True. Sometimes it's not adversarial, but we've discussed how you need to look at both sides of the story, and we're intentionally raising your kids. I would take the controversial side and make you thinking about what I'm talking about. So, and you were taught to listen to what the other side and the other person has got to say, which I think is always very important. So that's how we raised you, and
yeah,
and we keep going. Yeah,
and just finally on that, speaking, Mum's feedback was, I've heard all this before. So anyway,
yeah, but not this episode. She said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to this episode."
Yes. So, based on what you were just saying, we understand. First episode is long. We're going to try and keep them shorter. Hopefully, try and get some little clips and stuff. YouTube, if you'd like it, subscribe, comment. For some reason, comments aren't working. I don't know. We'll try and figure it out. Anyway, let's get the ball rolling. Dad, groupthink. Why are we talking about groupthink?
I think it's important to understand further to what we're going through in episode 1, like worldview, is how is your thought process? How is your mind working, and how do you formulate your worldview? I think groupthink is a topic which we need to cover as to one part of that which forms your worldview. We've all been subject to groupthink, and we'll go through what that means. But when you understand what it's all about, you start sitting back and saying, "Oh yeah, I was in a group, and why did I go down that path?" And we've all done it. It's not unique to anyone. It's all part and parcel of us going through life. Yes. So yeah, it's another little plank in the journey of understanding how we come to think the way we do. Yeah, that's why I would like to do that. But can I just there's a quote from one of the greatest minds ever, Albert Einstein.
Rude of you to quote yourself to start.
Pardon?
So it's a bit rude of you to quote yourself when you're starting.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Albert Einstein, when we all think alike, no one thinks very much.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom. One of the many quotes attributed to Albert Einstein.
Yeah, yes, and that's one I think which is very relevant to what we're going to go through. So, what is groupthink, Adrian?
What is groupthink? There's a few ways you could define it, but fundamentally, groupthink is what happens when people get in a group, and rather than thinking as individuals, the thinking becomes more of as a collective. And the very nature of it becoming collective kind of thinking is that it becomes a lot more simplistic, a lot less nuanced, and people are governed by these different unconscious forces of a group. So a couple of examples of it could be as simple as being in an office environment, and they say the same things, right? Everyone has gone to the same schools, everyone's in this, they've got similar backgrounds and interests, and everyone thinks the same thing. That's like a very basic form of groupthink. But on probably the other scale of that, we have, say, a totalitarian type society or any other like large scale group where there is heavy consequences for not actually thinking of being part of the group. So the way I see this is it's not so much just groupthink as much as the dynamics of human behavior and psychology and how that differs from when you are an individual and when you're in a group, because it's very interesting how that changes, and so significantly how it changes when it's in a group environment. And I know we'll get into a bit more detail about how that happens, but top line, that's a bit of an overview.
Yeah, I'd just like to break down into four areas. You mentioned one as to how groupthink occurs, and you've touched on one, which is forced upon people, and I would call that the totalitarian way of looking at it, which is China, Saudi Arabia, and even I'll go to religious upbringing. In the Islamic world, and if that's the way you are brought up, it's forced upon you. I think an example, of course, another example was 1984. How that was all in that book. It was forced upon people. So that's one way in which groupthink arises. The other one I call organic or endemic, and that's in big organizations, in big companies, where there are elements of parts of that big organization, and sometimes a whole lot of organization. There are sections which there are groupthink, and we'll come into how those arise and what have you. The other is I call it the bureaucracies. A lot of bureaucracies out there where there is a groupthink mentality, and they don't take cognizance that there are outside views, and that becomes a long-term problem for a lot of bureaucracies. And the other one is, of course, political parties. You get into a political party, and that's the way you think. So I see that as organic and endemic in that structure. Then the other one is coerced. And what I mean by that is that there's narratives that have come out from governments and other such things, but I think a perfect example, a couple of examples on being coerced, groups are coerced into it, society is coerced into it, is that which occurred around the war on terror. Iraq, we've got to go into Iraq, we've got to go into Afghanistan. So there were group thinking there of yes, okay, we've got to do that. And the most recent one, of course, is the COVID years, where the lockdowns, the social distancing, masks, the vaccines, and all of that the groupthink that came out of that. And so they're examples of coerced groupthink. And the other one is choice. I'll call it the born again Christians. And which is good luck to them. They make a decision in their life. You know that video I showed you recently where that oh no, it wasn't you, it was someone else. Yeah, where this chap had a born again Christian moment, saved his life, but he made a choice to move into that area.
Is that groupthink though? If you make a choice, like an individual choice?
Well, he moves into a groupthink.
Okay, so you mean more like an ideology?
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting point, actually, because I thought about this a lot, where the modern society, because we have such access to information, so let's say compare it to people in, I don't know, the early 1900s or even before, right, the 1800s, where they didn't have air travel, they didn't have like ubiquitous transportation. They didn't really have the ability to easily get from A to B apart from ships. So people were a bit more stuck, or they stayed and grew up in their own little environment.
Yeah.
So then you have these different kinds of groups that develop with different mindsets and psychology. And I'm trying to work out where I wanted to get back to when I started that, and I completely lost the plot because I got distracted. But what were you saying just before that?
I was saying how people choose to move into a group.
That's it. Got it. Okay, I'm back. Thank you.
You got it? You're back into it?
I'm back into it. It used to be simpler because people were more homogenous in an environment. So you'd have people who all grew up in the same area. They all went to the same school. They have a very localized understanding of the world, so they all kind of thought the same way naturally. So it was more cohesive.
Yes, I get it. Yeah.
As society gets bigger and more fragmented,
Ooh,
it's
wow.
people are more diffused, and they're like have different beliefs and lots of different niches. So that's where ideology comes in, because it can help bring disparate people together under one unifying belief system, which then becomes this group that you can influence. And that's what you see in totalitarian societies. It's what religions are. I mean, there's also, it's not a negative thing as such, but it's like a unifying belief system. But it's harder now because there's so much exposure to information, which is where I was starting in our call.
Well, there's a lot more choice. You can choose to. There's a lot more choice.
And what you find is the groups are getting more fragmented and getting smaller and smaller niches.
Yes, and social media has been a driver to that as
Absolutely.
well. In that, but then there are bigger divisions, which we're seeing in America, which is, you're either for or against Trump, you're either for or against Biden, and you're either Republican or Dem, and that divide is getting bigger in that bigger context. But within the context of just living, there are smaller groups fragmenting out all the time.
That touches on, actually, I think, a really key part of why there is groupthink in the first place. And you had this, like, they're against each other. There is an us versus them mentality. Ultimately, the reason, like, we're social beings, right? As humans, we're naturally social, and we want to be social because it's like expedient for survival. It's if we're not in a group, we're at more risk of dying, because there's no support, no acceptance, etc. And that's a really important factor with the reason people gravitate towards groupthink, is because the consequence of being isolated and ostracized evolutionarily and historically is very bad. It's not good for the human being to be ostracized and isolated. So deep down in our, like, the reptile brain, there is a need to belong. And what happens with groupthink is that even if people have different point of view, they maybe don't voice it because the risk of being banished, or the risk of being frowned upon, or losing your status in the social group is too big.
Yeah, we touched on that the other day. I think you used the word consequences.
Mm-hmm.
What are the consequences of you not being in a group? And that's a big pressure upon people to continue to be in a group, because it's hard to stand out from a group. It's hard to once you're in a group, and we'll come up with some other examples that I've got on that. Yeah, but do you want to go through those points you had there on core idea and all of that? Because I thought they were very good. Just go through those, because
I can do that.
I think they're very.
Let me just whoops. I'm just going to put them into a slide so we could share that as a visual as well. For anyone watching, seems like people are watching on YouTube. Okay. You share my screen. See, this is what happens. We don't have a producer. It's just
you're it, mate.
Tones and the chosen son making this shit happen. There we are. Okay. So this is just my very rough notes, but I think it's something to explain about the factors that determine why people end up having group thinking and mass psychology, group psychology.
Yeah, I think this is very good. Just if you go through that, mate.
Yeah. So number one, like I just mentioned, is that humans survive when they're in groups. We have a deep, deep need for connection, harmony, belonging, survival. That's something that's encoded in who we are. We don't do well with isolation. And that's something that's been since like thousands and thousands of years. We
It's
realize
the tribe. It's going back to tribes. That's how we work.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's important to understand how those survival-oriented behaviors from our distant ancestors flow through into modern applications of human behavior.
Yep.
So essentially it means is that we want to survive, and being in a group helps that. The other aspect of groupthink, and that's why it can be pretty pervasive, is that there's consequences for going against the group. And a lot of there's a scale of those consequences, and that is the important part. It's not always like you're going to die or you're going to a gulag, but there could be something that if you have a point of view that most of your peer group don't share, that then there is like, you will attract criticism from people. And because of that, a lot of people don't voice those views. And that is a way of groupthink as well, because there's consequences of not agreeing with the group. So therefore not everyone, but a lot of people just go along with it, even if internally they don't agree.
Yep.
Another aspect of it is what we call cognitive load. So thinking's hard. So we use shortcuts. One of the biggest shortcuts is that the more people that believe something, the more likely it is to be true.
Yes.
Another one is authority. So we have a bias towards believing the experts, and those in authority positions. There's studies that have been done that show, like, the visuals having someone in the right outfit with a bookcase behind them,
Yes,
makes them seem,
or a white coat.
yeah,
That's true.
All of these things are cues,
Yes.
which trigger our mind to work in certain ways, but that's more about manipulating it. Ultimate point there is that, hey, if most of society believes this, chances are it's true. That's kind of a default, and we're not going to go through and think it. Another one's distraction. We're just too busy. We don't have the time or energy to think about those things. So we're just like, all right, cool. What does everyone else think? Easy. You just sort of go along with it because it doesn't matter that much. Repetition of a certain message. So the more that you hear something, everyone believes it. You go along. That's a good quote from Lenin. A lie told often enough becomes the truth.
Ain't that true?
Yeah, it wasn't true, and then it became true.
Yes, we'll make it true.
Yeah, and it is interesting though, because that's a characteristic of these totalitarian societies, is that relentless repetition of party slogans and truths and immense consequences for going against it. After a while, people then at first they're just going along with it, but then they start believing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, where they flip. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. And then just the last one, it's a factor, it's less directly related, but from an influence perspective, and if we want to talk about how these insights are used to consciously and deliberately influence people and groups of people, it's much easier to influence a group than it is to influence a group of individuals.
I think it's a really important. I think it's a really good point, this one. Yeah.
So yeah, this is strategically breaking that down. When you get people to identify with the group identity, whatever it is. So I don't know, I'm a Manchester United fan, or I'm a libertarian or a Republican, or whatever it is. If you make them like identify closely with that and don't want to, basically, the more they identify with this, the more they risk being kicked out if they go against it. So by appealing to these group identities and pitting them against each other, dividing these groups, that's a very effective way to influence enormous amounts of people by appealing to groups. And also other factors is that the group psychology is far more simplistic. It's very primal, it's very basic. It's like operates in more subconscious ideas, but that's probably getting a little bit too deep. So yeah, that's just a little breakdown.
I think it's very good to understand those elements of it. And then you make a point here, why is it important? You make a comment there, perception shapes reality. And then it's like, who shapes the perception?
Yes, and here we get to the truthiness of it does shape the truth. No, and I mean the reason we're talking about this stuff as well is because it is important when you start exploring some more of the specifics and details of themes that are often deemed conspiracy theories. And some of them may well be, quite frankly.
Oh, look, I just want to make it clear. There's a lot of conspiracy theories or ideas out there which are, in my mind, and I've been down so many different rabbit holes, which are completely wacko. And I've looked at them and I've used my own judgment and common sense and experience to say, no, I'm just not going to go there. Well, I've been there, but I don't support it. But then other ones, to me, as I said to you in the first episode, the truth is no one knows the absolute truth. But when I see a preponderance of evidence that I see from hardcore sources, being what people actually say, government documents, books that I've read. I read books back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, mid 1950s, and
you read books from that period.
Sorry, yes, from that period. Sorry,
he's old, but he's not that old.
Some days I feel old.
reading books since the 1800s.
Yes. But no, I just find I just want to clarify something that someone did say, and how do you move the chaff from the wood and all of that? And, it's just a lot of time and effort and looking at trying to find out the real core sources. You never know that, you're never going to get to it, but so that's
so just to wrap that up as to the why. Mainly because it happens to everyone. We're all going to be subject to it in some level. Like we all are influenced by the people around us, and at a certain level, we're all going to think more alike. With everything, there is a scale of intensity and breadth that you might have with that, but it's just really to be aware of. And especially, this would be my main point to get across, is that be very conscious of when people are appealing to group identities, like identity politics, where it's like this group versus this group, and you wash out all nuance and everything becomes very simplistic and us versus them, right and wrong, very binary, because often that's used as a manipulative tool. So that's why I think it's just good to be conscious of the group thing. But
just another thing, you touched on some areas that one must be very, very aware of confirmation bias, where you do look to things which are going to be supportive of your view anyway. And this is confirmation bias is similar to but different in some regards to cognitive dissonance. And your only confirmation bias is also part of groupthink. It's relevant in there because in the group the confirmation bias is you're only ever looking at things that are going to be acceptable to the group. So there's a group confirmation bias as well.
Yeah, but we all have confirmation bias too.
Because I know.
You read the stuff you're interested in, and a lot of the time it confirms your own beliefs. You're like, see, I knew that was true.
Exactly, that's confirmation bias. But I have to say that I do try to avoid that, and I do try and look at both sides of the story. I do.
Yeah. Dad, what's the Ash experiment?
Oh, we touched on that in the briefly, in the first episode.
Okay, all right. So then, we did. We probably didn't go too in depth. What about? So there's other ones which I think are relevant to this. And this is where it would be good to have someone to fact check and pull things up. So excuse me if I get any details wrong, but I believe it was called the Milgram experiment, where they have the one with authority, where they basically have a person shocking someone else.
Yeah, and there was a test subject who was answering the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this actually, that's less groupthink. That's more about authority, but
The Stanford prison experiment.
that's probably a better one. Do you
Oh.
know it well enough to break it down? I put a bullet point in my notes, but
I haven't researched. I haven't researched in depth. Basically, can I just come back? The Ash experiment, which we touched on before, I think was had its own. It was done in the 1970s, and it had its own flaws to it. But it was interesting. This is the one that we talked about in the last episode with the 7 people. One's the 6 actors, one subject, and the 6 actors are saying, no, this line is different. To what that's the Ash experiment. So, but there were flaws in that because there wasn't diversity in the people. There were university students and age and all that sort of that. But it was still very interesting. Now, the Stanford prison experiment was where there was, I think it was, I don't know, 10 subjects as prisoners, and there were 24 who acted as guards during a 24-hour period. And it's not quite on groupthink, but it is referred to as groupthink, is where the prisoners took on the role as being prisoners, right? And the guards took on the role as being guards. And when I say role, they actually adopted the guards would talk to each other, and the prisoners would talk to each other and say, and there would be various interactions between them, which reinforced the prisoners being prisoners and the guards being prisoners. They had to stop it after 6 days. They were going to plan it to do for 2 weeks, I think, and they had to stop it after 6 days because it was just getting too oppressive on the prisoners. Oh, there, you've got it there.
Yeah. So it was the crazy thing about it. Actually, can extend this was that they all entered. They didn't know each other. They all entered as like the same people, and then it was like an arbitrary split between guards and prisoners. And what was the crazy thing is that over this period of time, in this like controlled group environment, the guards started becoming quite abusive of the prisoners, and it was, well, let's say, within the first 4 days, 3 prisoners have become so traumatized that they're released. The second day, the prisoners staged a rebellion. Guards then worked out a system of rewards and punishments to manage the prisoners. Over the course of the experiment, some of the guards became cruel and tyrannical, while a number of prisoners became depressed and disoriented. However, only after an outside observer came upon the scene and registered shock did Zimbardo conclude the experiment, less than a week after it started. So
what was interesting, what was interesting is Zimbardo, who was the one running it, admitted after it, is that he actually fell into the
says right here,
role.
yeah.
Oh, is it right? Yeah, that's right. Felt like a prison intern and then a research psychologist, which I found that bit to be fascinating. Is
Yeah, this is interesting to see. However, others claim that the original advertisement attracted people who were predisposed to authoritarianism. So we don't really know what the advertisement is, but
look, in a lot of these things, there's always going to be, and there's critics of that experiment. But I think for the purposes of what we're talking about,
yeah,
it's an interesting, real hard-on experiment that did take place. What I did find interesting, Adrian, was I can't find any. Maybe I have to do more research on it, but I couldn't find any, say, 1990s, 2000s experiments that are talking about, groupthink conformity. Maybe because it's so prevalent, they haven't done any testing on it. I thought that was interesting.
they're like, yeah, we're done now. We've figured it out. It's all...
No, yeah, it happens. We don't need to. Yeah,
we know that groups
yes.
groups are heavily influenced. You only have to look at some of the crazy trends. I mean, that's another aspect. This is when I start feeling old, when I talk about what the youth are doing on their TikToks and stuff.
Oh, I tell you, there was just on that, trends and things that happened, was the bucket challenge. Remember the ice bucket challenge?
Yeah.
And it was originally to raise money. motor neuron disease.
Yeah, ALS.
ALS, yeah. And then it became a challenge around the world. I mean, it just,
Well, it's
and
interesting.
it was for attention. It was to get attention.
But it starts as like these, and I guess you could think good groupthink as well with things going viral is
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to make a point.
like,
Things that go viral, is that groupthink or what is it?
yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I guess it's an aspect of it because
Yeah.
people have this feeling that, oh, this is the thing that most people are doing, and I don't want to be left out. I want to be part of this because everyone's talking about it. It's this kind of hot new thing. I want to participate. And yeah, I think the interesting part is just the understanding the nature of us humans that we naturally form into groups. And there's totally nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's amazing. We love forming into groups. It's just when groups become so, what's the word? When a group becomes so defined and glued together by a strict ideology that people's thoughts have to adjust to that ideology. I think that's one risk. And the other risk of groups is more like in a crowd. And that's one thing we haven't spoken about that's actually in the Gustave Le Bon book, The Crowd, which was written in like 1896, I think. So at that stage.
Did you finish that?
Yeah, I've read it several times.
Oh, that's right.
I've got notes.
I bought it. No, I didn't buy it. I printed it out, and I think I got about 3 chapters in, and something came of more prominence, which is called a podcast. So I haven't got back to it yet.
Yeah. The other part I was saying is like what happens when you get a bunch of people together in a place, and I think everyone can think about when you see a mob. When a group of people get together and maybe they're protesting or they're angry about something, and then something sparks it, and then they turn from a peaceful protest to like an angry mob. And that's a whole different dynamic that when people get together in groups, there's like this primal aspect where they lose their higher level consciousness, and it's almost a hypnotic merging into one unit. They go from being like, I don't know, like 500 individuals contained in our little bodies, and then it all compresses into one holistic unit. And yes, we also get that in with sport. That's why people love going to sporting games too, when you're with all the supporters and cheering and singing songs and together. It's like the energies of everyone present unify into one greater energy, and people actually it's like a good feeling. Same with like concerts, when the music is that binding force. There's a book just called Crowds and Power by a guy called Elias Canetti, and he specifically talks more about these physical crowds. And he actually, interesting dude. I saw a documentary on him, but anyway, part of where he lived when he was writing this was I believe it was in Germany, but there was a football stadium that he could see from his room. And, there'd be all these games, and that he would that would like provoke the thoughts about the dynamics of crowds and people and lay it into his work. So there's a physical dimension to, I guess we're talking about groupthink and crowds, but there's more of the psychological dimension, and there's a physical dimension. Because
people can get pleasure out of it's not just the thing that people get pleasure of being with crowd and seeing winners. Unfortunately, we didn't see a winner when we were supporting the Bears.
Yeah, you certainly didn't have.
We never saw a premiership. North Sydney, for those that don't understand, North Sydney Rugby League Bears. Adrian and I were supporters there and went to games for about 5 years. Our season tickets, and we didn't see a premiership. And
you did get a collective sense of disappointment.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but we had fun. Even in losing, we still had fun.
Yeah. There's one other point I actually wanted to just round out what I was saying before, because it was like reflecting on this. I thought it was an interesting idea. So if you consider that and this, maybe going down a different path, so I'll keep it short. But
That's okay.
if you consider that we're all fundamentally made of energy and vibrational energy, in a crowd environment, you have a larger volume of energy that comes together, who otherwise, this is just a stranger. I don't have any connection to them. So it creates like a single unit. And then when you're with someone who you are really close to, you have this depth of energy or an intensity. So you feel a merging of two people, but it's because it's more intense. You don't need as many versus in a crowd. And I thought that was interesting because there is a certain feeling you get when you're with people you really like, and there's certain feelings you get when you're with groups of people who are bonded through something.
My immediate thought when you say that is I haven't been to one, but I've seen a number of YouTubes, and is you can feel the energy that comes out of the gospel singers in the churches in the South, and it's not just their belief system, but the joy they get out of singing together, and the energy that is created out of that is incredible. There's going to be incredible energy tonight at the Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah, well, with music as well, it's literally vibrations.
No, that's exactly right. It's vibrations. Yeah,
it's vibrations going through the air, and that's when, especially when people sing together, you get that sense of resonance. People are like kind of you're singing and you're kind of vibrating together, so it's a good feeling. But
what you're doing is you're prompting that there's going to be an episode on this as well down the track. Oh my God!
Hang on, I have a question for you, Dad. Actually, I don't have a question, but I hear my notes tell me
what
that you have a did you know at Big Tones.
Are we finishing up? Are we?
Well, I think 40 minutes is probably. And do you have other things you want to go through?
No, there's some of the quotes there from Gustave Le Bon there. That was some of them
quotes from Gussie.
Yeah. I thought some of them. Yeah, and then Gustave. I want to talk about some real world groupthink disasters.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a fun quote.
Yeah, this is the one I like. Yeah.
In crowds, the foolish, ignorant, and envious persons are freed from their sense of insignificance and powerlessness, and are instead possessed by the notion of brutal and temporary strength. Boom.
Yeah, I like that.
I like this one because it's very poetic.
Yes.
An individual in a crowd is a grain of sand amidst other grains of sand, which the wind stirs up at will.
Very poetic.
It's nice, isn't it? What else was there? Oh yeah, the Lenin one we've already said. This is one from Walter Lippmann, which I think is interesting. We are told about the world before we see it. We imagine most things before we experience them. And those preconceptions, unless education has made us acutely aware, govern deeply the whole process of perception. So he's talking about stereotypes, which is a term he coined.
I like the one of Gustave, the masses have never thirsted after truth.
Yeah, I don't think I pasted it in. Whoops. Just read it out then.
Okay. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduces them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. I like that. So that's a good one. Yeah, I like that. Some real world, and I'll just deal with these quickly because there's something I think we haven't touched on is social media effect. Some real world disasters caused by groupthink was Kodak. Kodak lost its preeminence as the leader in the photographic world because they thought the digital camera was not going to take over the clarity of what they were doing. The other one was New Coke. If you remember, it was Coca-Cola. You don't remember New Coke? Oh, okay. There you go. Shows me how old I am. No, they wanted to sort of they come up with Pepsi was starting to eat into their market share. They said, "Oh no, we'll beat them. We'll come up with a new formula." No, the people said, "No, we don't do that." Juries. What happens in a jury is you can get every single jury. You get these, and it flows into the concept of the strong leader in groups within corporations. The strong leader, and someone won't stand up to it. Have you got that visual on that board on the table?
I do.
So I think there's some ones. There's some interesting ones. The other one was that'll do for now. We want to go over it. So there was one other thing on social. Yeah, just put that up. Yeah, we've all been in this situation. We've all done it.
Yeah, because there's consequence, and that's why I guess that was why it stuck out to me so much. Is you think about in this situation, you're at the board meeting, and the bosses propose something, and then everyone else agrees, and like externally, everyone says, "Yeah, it's a great idea." You can, even if you're really against it, you will consider the consequence of saying that. And if there was no negative consequence, you wouldn't have a problem with saying it, which is why I think groupthink is one aspect of groupthink is really based on the consequences.
I think it's a very important concept or element of groupthink. What are the consequences? Say you're in you're at university and you're unhappy with what the professor is, his views are out of order or his behaviour, and you just sort of sit there and you're sort of like, you're not going to object, because the consequences, if you do, you could very well be failed. I think that's very relevant. Or you're in a boardroom like that, you stand up and say, well, or not a boardroom, or in a groupthink, the leader is just going to say, "You're out of here, son."
Do you think
you're sacked?
Maybe you could simplify the two types of groupthink into these two categories. One is you don't say what you want to say because you're afraid of the consequences. And then the other is just groupthink that comes through ignorance, i.e., people are thinking that way because they've just been around the same people. They're not seeking other sources of information. Do you think it's as simple as two categories like that?
I'm just hesitating that sometimes people do change, subject to, and sometimes people have pressure to sort of say, you better stand up for yourself. Like the girlfriend or the boyfriend or the wife or the husband, friend, whatever, and sitting in across the table and having a few drinks and for a long period of time, that's how they've been behaving. I'll do that, and then pressure says, well, if you don't stand up and say anything, you're going to be there for a long time. So stand up and be someone. So, but I understand. I think people can get lazy. They get into a habit easily. Yeah, there can be habit forming. What I think what you're saying is they don't even think about consequences.
Yeah, exactly, because they don't know. It's just like, and we say they, as I'm not like saying other people, like everyone is prone to it, where everyone, this is the norm.
Yes, yes, it becomes yes, that's the way we are.
Which is why I think sometimes the people that are a bit more maybe active about trying to get different points of views will try and throw in. I've heard this story, and I don't know specifically the details, but where in organizations they would have a specific person, especially at like senior levels, whose role it is to play devil's advocate.
Oh, absolutely. No, that is a counter to groupthink, and organizations who are sophisticated and understanding groupthink, a tool against groupthink is to have a devil's advocate. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think, and this is slightly related, but a way to combat the groupthink is through a diverse mix of backgrounds, perspectives, opinions, and a culture to express those. But I think what's happened is that as a concept has been replaced with diversity, which is a corporate performance to meet quotas for ethnic groups, disabilities, genders, so that they can say that they're doing the right thing. But the concept of having a diverse mix of perspectives, of which maybe because someone is is female, because someone has grown up not being able to use their legs, they have different perspectives on matters than other people. I think that is a very valid concept that has been a little bit hijacked by the woke diversity.
Okay, diversity, equity, inclusion, and that is something that we could discuss. But on this particular point, on groupthink, the BBC have instituted a policy where if you do not accept their DEI, their diversity, equity, inclusion policies, you will not be hired.
How diverse?
Exactly. So
so ridiculous. Yeah.
This is fair. I read it the other week and I said, no, this is not right. This cannot possibly be right. And I checked it, and there's the document. That's the hiring document. And so they're creating their own group. So,
yeah, well, that's the crazy thing about it, which I find really interesting, is the premise of like a lot of these let's call it woke for lack of a better description, is about like diversity, equity, inclusion. But the way that it's being used is incredibly exclusionary, and it's very combative and very like us versus them, and that's also why I think it's a legitimate movement that has been hijacked, because people often use this like shield of virtue of like, we're protecting the less vulnerable, or like we're protecting people, and then we can use that as a shield to pass agendas.
But to be clear, I have no problems with people who are, and I'm going to put in the inverted commas, worthy, who fall within the diversity, equity, inclusion category, to be hired or accepted. But a topic that I do want to cover is, in some form, is the movement away from meritocracy.
I think,
and that is the way in which our when you look at the education system, which is something I've looked at in the Western world, in the UK, most of the EU, and particularly in America, the movement away from meritocracy is causing a fundamental societal problem, which we can touch on later.
That we're going to start getting in more of the juicy stuff. It would lead to platforms, then we start getting into the other stuff. But I think just for one thing on that, people are very in favor of, say, the let's do DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, where people are hired to start off and fulfill quotas or whatever, until you might learn that person is your heart surgeon,
or pilot,
or firefighter, and I think I'm not against that. I'm totally for there should be, people should be given more opportunities. Like, you should be given the opportunity to have an equal chance at getting the role.
I completely agree, and
maybe a little leg up potentially, but not to the point that you're not going to perform as good as someone else.
Well, it's not conducive to let me just a consequence of doing that is reducing standards of performance for a group, and that's not, as I said earlier, over time there will be catastrophic consequences to discuss another time. But we haven't touched on social media and particularly on groupthink as it affects the adolescents.
Speaking of social media, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube.
And we'll get the comments going somehow. So can just what does subscribe mean? What does that mean?
Oh, yeah, I've got to be conscious of our audience. It just means that you get notified when there's a new video uploaded, and it should be prioritized in your YouTube account. So that's it.
Right. So it's important for viewers to subscribe.
You don't want to miss an episode.
Because I'm going to have to tell people that, we've got episode 2 up, but I just want to tell them, if you want to get notifications.
That is the notification bell.
Exactly. Okay.
That is
all righty.
That is walking around manually notifying people.
Oh, mate, it started with 20. With 20, we've now got nearly 80 views or something, so that's pretty good. So,
beginnings.
Social media, adolescence, groupthink. Oh boy, I knew that we were going to sort of try and keep this to 30 or 40 minutes.
I was trying to wrap it up at 40.
You know what? Shall we just touch on it? No, I won't touch on it. It's very important.
No, you can't serve it up for me like that and then not. Just at least give me a bullet point. We can cut some of these into clips.
Loss of identity. Loss is not a loss of identity. Loss of individuality. And actually, what I will do is, peer pressure, there's a word for this. It's called, I don't know how to pronounce it, homophily. 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 The tendency for... Huh?
I was just repeating the word.
Yeah. The tendency for people to be attracted to individuals who are similar to themselves.
Like couples that look exactly the same. That's super creepy when you see that.
Okay. All right. No, I just find the impact of social media on adolescents and how it impacts upon the rest of their life is, and they become part of groups, not just on social media. Then impacts upon the way in which they interact with their school friends. It's everything. So
that's definitely that's a substantial subject worthy of its own episode.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So before I get into big tones, did you know, which will close this out, we are planning on our next episode to be on paradigm shifts.
Paradigm shifts. What's this? What's the paradigm shift? We're going to wait for the next episode. We'll build suspense.
I'll wait for the next episode to find out. Yeah, and it's I find it to be very important because it sets another platform for later topics.
For a new paradigm that we're about to enter.
Yes.
We're basically using these to influence and prime you and create a group of followers. Just like group psychology.
A group of followers who think independently and don't get influenced by you and me. There is an article. So just we will attach some of the articles and documents on it to episode 1 that we said we would. And there is an article. Sorry, there's a document here which I think I'll send to you to be attached to this on groupthink, which I found to be very, very good. So, in closing, big tones, did you know? Where did the number 0 come from?
Where did the number 0 come from?
Where did it originate?
That's like... Wait. That's such a... Even that question to me seems like so... I have never even thought of this question. I always imagined numbers to have always existed. So
that's why I keep throwing this thing. It's like, go on.
So the way that the question is framed, though, makes me think that 1, like from 1 upwards, existed and 0 was like a new invention. Oh, okay.
It was. You're true.
Okay. I think it's when they got to 9. They had 9 sheep.
They had 9. No. Before they had 9 sheep, they had None.
What? Well, yeah, that would not. None was just the state of emptiness.
Nothing.
So,
No, but that's it. You've just answered the question.
hooray! What I win? No, what? Explain.
What did you win?
Can you explain it?
Yes, it is actually started in India. And it was conceptualized in the 5th century in India, and it came from the thing nothingness. You're absolutely correct. And the Sanskrit word for it was sunya, S-U-N-Y-A. But it wasn't until the 7th century that an Indian mathematician, whose name was Brahmagupta, astronomer and mathematician, who brought in the number 0. And from there, it moved its way across into the Arabic world, the Islamic world, in the 8th to 14th century. And then moved into the Western world until the Fibonacci. Remember, we'll get into Fibonacci, the Fibonacci number.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
so an Indian
astronomer
and
an astronomer and mathematician, Brahmagupta.
He made up 0.
0, correct.
So what were they doing before that?
They were the Roman numerals in Europe. They did have the numbers 1 to 9. Yeah.
So Roman numeral doesn't have 0?
No.
Interesting. So if you have nothing, you have no, like, it's not even worth noting. You can't, there's no thing to note down the fact you have nothing.
I know. Well, I just like
it is actually it makes sense though if you think about it back then, because there is numbers would be mostly used for documenting physical things, right? Or even say, okay, so it's here. If there's one of them, there's 2, whereas 0 is more of an abstraction.
Absolutely
is an absence of things, so you wouldn't really need to note it.
And that's how they looked at it. It was a nothingness, it was a nothingness, an abstract number, but the utilization of that into the 1 to 9 and then becoming 10 created through this mathematician. He was able to work out addition, subtraction, multiplication. And then in the Islamic world, they brought in, it's called the Hindu-Arabic system. They developed the algebra, arithmetic, trigonometry, and astronomy. They refined it. They were the golden years of Islam before it went dark. Yeah, so I thought
that's a good one.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have the binary code for our computers without 0, would we?
So thanks to Sanjay Gupta, the Indian.
Sanjay Gupta. Yes.
Was that his name? No, sorry. What was his name?
Brahmagupta.
Oh, Brahma. Sorry.
Yeah, it must have been the great grandfather of Sanjay Gupta, the famous cricketer.
Oh, he was? Okay. God, anyway, sorry. This is my own ignorance. Apologies for anyone offended with that, but that was that was just a mistake of hearing. Okay. That's a good did you know? I like that. It's a bit of fun. Well, we should have done an episode 0 just to honor him, but we're on episode 2.
Brahmagupta, thank you for coming up with 0. We honor you, and I'll have a nice toast of some Coke to you, son.
Alrighty. That's it. Thank you all for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks very much, and see you next time.
Peace out.
See you, mate.